So we are recording now, so just so everyone is aware of that. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dwight Littlefield. I'm the State Director for Career and Technical Education here at the Department of Ed. Before we get started, maybe while we're kind of going through, and I do want to recognize a couple of folks, but if you, just to help maybe Todd and Alyssa get an understanding of who was on the call, if you type your name and kind of what CTE you're from in the chat, that gives them something to kind of look through and see where you're located across the state. But before I turn it over to them, there are a couple of folks I do want to point out that are joining us this morning. Two other folks from the Department of Ed. Some of you may have met them. Nicole Madore and Marcy Whitcomb are both part of the, thank you for joining us. They're both part of the early childhood education team here. Leanne Larson oversees that team, and Leanne and I we're trying to work even more closely together.
Have you brushed your teeth?
Make the connections.
You have to. She's got to brush her teeth.
And make those connections and even do more with, I think they have a lot of resources that certainly this group could benefit from. So Nicole and Marcy, thank you for joining us. And as things get started, they can be certainly a great resource for you folks as well. The other person I wanted to recognize is Kate Levier. Spark. As you know, Maine Spark is one of their big things is focusing on certifications. So she has a real interest in making sure we move forward and do what we can to get these students certified and headed in the right direction for the best opportunities as they finish up their schooling. So I asked her to kind of listen in on part of this conversation as well. I also want to thank Brenda Gammon, the director in Mexico. Thank you, Brenda, for sending out the message and pulling all these folks together. Really appreciate that. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Todd and Alyssa from DHHS and OCFS and talk a little bit about some of the guidance that they're providing to folks and go from there.
Great, thank you, Dwight. I appreciate that. And first of all, before I start, Kate, no need to apologize. To be clear, at OCFS, we're pro teeth brushing as well. So, that's a good thing. We're all in support of tooth brushing, excuse me. So I'm Dr. Todd Landry. I'm the director of the Office of Child and Family Services. I'm joined today by Alyssa Wynn. Alyssa is the associate director for Child Development and Behavioral Health Services within OCFS. Included in that area would be the work that we do around child care subsidy, early childhood education, and support for child care and ECE. Also within the Office of Child and Family Services is children's licensing. And so any of the aspects related to licensing for child care resides within the Office of Child and Family Services. It's not actually in Alyssa's group. It's in a separate area, but both of those functions reside within the Office of Child and Family Services. The topic of child care and the issue of child care, of course, has been a significant one, has always been a significant one, but has garnered even more interest and questions during the COVID period. So just a little bit of background on OCFS's perspective and supports that we've provided for child care since the COVID outbreak really hit and the governor issued the first state of civil emergency, in mid-March. Child care has always been, as many of you know, determined to be an essential service. So back when the essential service moniker was a critical piece in March and in April, child cares were allowed to operate with safety and health precautions, but without any other restrictions. We had at one point about 50% of our child care providers in the state chose to close. 50% of them remained open. That was during the month of April. Beginning in May, we began to see a gradual reopening of child care centers. And as of this week, I think we're at about 83–84% of all of our licensed providers are open in the state. So the vast majority of our child care providers have opened or reopened. And although we do recognize some of them have reduced some of their capacity in order to make decisions that they think are in the best interest of their facility from a distancing perspective or sometimes from a staffing challenge perspective. So our supports for childcare began at the beginning of March. So well before a couple of weeks, I should say, before the state of civil emergency, we began providing guidance to childcare providers on how to prepare for what was happening at that point. And then since then, we have issued, generally speaking, once a month updated guidance to all childcare providers. The first of those came out in roughly the middle of March. And then since then, about the first of each month, we have provided updated guidance based on a number of factors. And those factors certainly include guidance from U.S. and Maine CDC on best practice health and safety precautions, compliance with governor's executive orders. We also have had additional questions that continue to come up from our child care providers, and so we've tried to address that in the guidance. It's important to note that the guidance now is a very long document. It's about 10 plus pages as it continues to expand and to try to provide additional information as we learn more about the spread of COVID, the impact of COVID in childcare settings, and to align childcare guidance with other guidances that the state is distributing, including guidance from the Department of Education. So keep all of that in mind a little bit as we talk about this. And my ADD is kicking in because it's just too much fun to watch Amber with the baby right now. So I apologize if I get a bit distracted there. Nonetheless, I do want to say that beginning in, and Alyssa, you may have to check me on this, it was either April or May, I think it was May, that we began to field questions from child care providers and from DOE and some of you about what does this mean for interns and what does this mean for CTE interns, practicums, etc. And so we provided guidance specifically to all of the providers in the state to make sure that they knew that those were still absolutely allowable. It is at the discretion of those child care providers. Some of them, most of them, I believe, are allowing it. There may be a few that are not. We have also that have any interns, practicum students, etc. They should be treated like staff. So from that perspective, that means that the screening procedures that we have put in place and required, although there are different options on how to implement the screening, should be implemented for any intern or practicum student just as if they were a staff member. That would also extend now to our most recent guidance that aligns with DOE guidance around masking and wearing face coverings in a child care setting. Those are now required. This aligns with the governor's executive order of mid-July. And again, we worked with DOE to align so that the age restrictions or requirements are exactly the same between our two departments. So very clearly on an inside the facility, all adults, whether they be parents, staff, interns, anyone, must wear a face covering, and any child 5 and over is required to wear a face covering. For children 2 to 4 years of age, that is recommended and encouraged but not required, and it should not be used for children 2 and under, or under the age of 2, I should say. So that completely aligns with the Maine CDC and US CDC guidance. We worked with CDC in order to implement those and to align those between our two departments. I recognize there's been a lot of questions about that. We certainly have heard loud and clear from some of our providers that they don't like that requirement, but it does align, and I do want to explain the rationale behind it, was really to align with the governor's executive order of mid-July to also align with what the Department of Education was putting out on the same day regarding their updated guidance, and based on the recommendations and science and evidence that Maine CDC and US CDC have access to and had advised us on. So that's a little bit about some of the hot topics, if you will, right now. I would say that from a CTE perspective, from an educational perspective for students, I think this is a unique period of time, and we can use this, and I know all of you are using this as learning opportunities for students to be able to understand and to see how what happens from a policy making and a individual provider decision making perspective when we're in a environment and a situation that none of us have ever experienced before. Even if some have tried to compare what we're going through to the H1N1 virus from a few to several years ago, H1N1 was a blip compared to what obviously we're all dealing with right now. And so we're all learning as we go forward. Guidance does change as we learn more about the virus and the spread of the virus. The other thing that I would conclude with, and I'll see if Alyssa wants to jump in with other comments, the last thing I will conclude with is now is a perfect time in the summer when we can begin to put in place these practices and begin to work, particularly with children and families, on implementing these practices, because we can use the outdoors to be able to mitigate some of the initial implementation challenges. Once we get into the fall and the winter, we all know, and based on where all of you are, you all know it becomes a little bit more difficult, obviously, to be able to do a lot of activities outside. We're also very cognizant of the fact that come fall and winter, we're going to be going into a traditional flu and cold season. Those things haven't miraculously disappeared during this time period. We also know from the science that cold and flu symptoms tend to mirror, in some cases very closely, the same symptoms as COVID. And so it is going to be a significant challenge. So putting these practices in place now and working on implementation of those practices and requirements, we believe are going to put us in a better position to be able to mitigate those impacts as we head into the fall and winter. So with that, I know you may have a lot of questions about it from your perspective, both on the CTE side as well as the perspective of students or providers. I'd be happy to try to address those. But before I do that, Alyssa, do you want to jump in with anything that you want to point out on other topics or clear up anything that I may have misspoken?
No, that was beautifully done.
See, Alyssa's review is coming up, and so there's some of that happening as well. No, I'm teasing. So Dwight, let me turn it back over to you and see where you obviously are very work with your colleagues here on a very frequent basis. You probably have a better idea of what some of their questions are. I tried to give a broad overview, but there may be some specifics that we can try to address in the remainder of our time.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't want to assume and jump in. If someone has a question, if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you and you can certainly speak to Todd. If not, I can. Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Hi guys, so I'm Megan Stubbs. I'm the early childhood teacher for Hancock County Tech Center in Ellsworth. So we pull from 8 different sending high schools and they come to us for half a day depending on age and class that they're in. So most of our schools are going to a hybrid model. So 2 in person, 2 out, cleaning day. So as of right now, the thought is that our on-site preschool that we typically would run wouldn't happen just because of changeover of high school students and the way that they're coming, and just space in general on how to, space out our high school students. So when reaching out to some of the centers that I've worked with, some of the issue that they're hitting too is now they've been tasked to take on school-age kids that can't go to school on certain days, but parents still have to work, including all of us teachers that have kids that now won't be in school, but we need to be there. So the answers that I've gotten so far are, we can't give you a solid answer because we potentially will be kind of at max capacity anyways and using any sort of space. And this may not necessarily be for you, Todd. I was thinking maybe someone from Maine Roads, because I'm thinking about certification and trying to think, okay, so if they're at max capacity and they can't take my students, if we can't run preschool at my school, how do we still get students hours and certification? So is there a way that if we're also teaching, remotely, like there's still, so even though I'm not having all of my students in my class at once, same thing for kinder, first, second, third grade special ed students, they're not all in class at once, but these teachers still have to, supply them with online studies, things like that. Could my student do remote teaching, supportive teaching on their remote days as well to help those teachers? Like, is that something that we can look at? Because I do think that some of these child cares are overwhelmed. Our area doesn't have a ton of child care facilities. And so the ones that we do have, they reach max capacity easily every year. And now if you add in school age kids, they're really at max capacity. So to try and ask them to take on my high school students is, a lot for them when they're already trying to figure out how to keep their own staff and their own kids safe. So I just don't know if there's another plan we can think of on what's appropriate and how to help these students still get hours. And I know also when we sent out our surveys, I don't know how many other schools maybe had to call parents or ask for surveys about in-person learning versus remote learning and what their preference might be. A lot of my parents said that they would be comfortable coming with their student coming to my high school class, but not as comfortable coming to my high school class and also then attending an outside placement, because then now they're going to 3 different schools because they're going to their sending high school, to our high school, and then I'm asking to put them at another school. So then parents are like, that might be too much though, too many different kids, too many bus rides, because my sophomores and juniors typically don't drive. So that means that they have to take another bus. And I think our busing staff is concerned about that as well, because they need that cleaning period between morning runs and afternoon runs to kind of clean those buses. So I don't know if maybe we can think about that and talk about that, or outdoor play groups, something. So I don't know who maybe could help, kind of address those certification questions, or if anyone else from our high school teachers maybe has some similar concerns or something that I maybe missed.
Yeah, and you had lots of questions in there, so I'm gonna try to answer as many of those as possible, and maybe with Dwight and Alyssa's help, hopefully we can get to several of those. So I want to address kind of the bigger picture first, and then we'll kind of dive into and get down to the granular question around certifications, et cetera. From the bigger picture perspective, anytime we switch anytime there's a switch to a hybrid model or to some type of a mixed model or a reduced school day model, et cetera, it's going to put some pressure somewhere else. And you are correct that, and we're certainly hearing it, depending upon what individual school districts are making individual decisions. And it may be very possible that all of our school districts in the state, none of them look exactly alike when all is said and done, which adds a layer of complexity. It also adds some flexibility from a local perspective. So what we are trying to do is a multi-pronged strategy towards supporting those localities in a number of different ways. So first and foremost, I do want to say from our vantage point, we are encouraging all programs, even those that have been co-housed with school districts and school district facilities, to continue to stay open. Now, we recognize that's a challenge for school districts when they're trying to potentially distance kids and they're trying to pick up space where they can, or they have some other concerns about it. But we think, from our perspective, we continue to encourage those to happen. And I know a number of Head Start, early Head Start programs, for example, are sometimes co-housed in school facility buildings. We believe that capacity is absolutely essential right now, and so we are encouraging that. But we also recognize that's an individual school district and facility decision that they'll have to make, and we recognize and honor that. So that's number one. Number two that I wanted to point out is since mid-March, when we implemented, following the governor's proclamation of state of civil emergency, we put in place our emergency child care plan. And that emergency plan allows us, among other things, to issue emergency licenses and waive certain requirements. So a couple of things that we have done since March, and as long as the governor's state of civil emergency is in place, we'll be able to continue to do this, is we have waived the student-child ratio for school-age children to a maximum of 20-1. That aligns pretty closely with many school districts, of course, in the state. And so we felt like that was an appropriate thing to do. So that enables some increase of capacity without necessarily having to increase more staffing. The other thing that we have been doing is issuing emergency childcare licenses for new facilities or relocated facilities or some expansions of facilities. So for example, we have some facilities that said, I have the capacity to serve more kids, but my facility can't because of state fire marshal, and that remains a requirement, of course. So we've been able to work with them and very quickly license or alternatively license, emergency license their facility in a different location so they can accommodate more kids. We've done about 14 to 15 of those emergency licenses. And we shared yesterday on the MSMA phone call to school districts and others that we stand ready to do more of those emergency licenses as the situation permits and may require. So that's another strategy that we have implemented. To your point about certification and how students can get some certifications, I do think that, and I'm going to look to Dwight for a little bit of assistance here, I do think MRTQ can certainly help with that. I am not completely familiar, so I don't want to step out too far on a branch that's going to be a weak one for me to stand on as it relates to whether or not that would meet the requirements for certification. So I think we're going to need to get back to you on that specific piece of it. I do know in some situations around the state, we have child care providers who have said the opposite of the situation you gave. And I know it's different perspectives and both of them are equally valid at this point. Some are saying, continue to send those students because I need more assistance here, even though it doesn't count towards ratio. I need more of those assistants here to help kids, particularly with individualized learning and to help them with their distance learning and virtual learning, et cetera. We do have some of the situations, like you said, that the provider is uncomfortable because of the number of the environments that the student would be in, that they make the decision that they don't want them coming into the facility. Both of them are equally valid. What we're trying to do is encourage them to be as open-minded as they can. We're pointing out to the DOE guidance that those students are going to have to wear masks when they're in school, for example. Those students are going to have to wear masks when they're on buses or transportation. And those students should be treated like staff when they come in the front door of the child care provider setting to either have or they take their own temperature and confirm symptoms and things of that nature. And so we believe with all of the safety and health precautions, it is a relatively and reasonable strategy and continued support to have those students come into child care settings. But with that said, we still defer to those individual providers to make that ultimate decision. So those are a few of the things I wanted to share. Alyssa, Dwight, you guys may want to jump in because both of you or either of you may have some different perspectives that you want to jump in on the questions that were asked.
No, thanks, Todd. I think that's great. And I think that's one of the big things was that piece that you're encouraging those centers to still work with their CTE students. And I think that certainly helps these instructors in engaging in those conversations. Meghan, your question
I will just add to that. We are doing a webinar next week that's going to be taped and provided through MRTQ to childcare providers. And with Alyssa's help, I will remember to make sure that we specifically call this question out to those childcare providers and directors to say, this is still a valuable and important resource that can be of an assistance to your children, to your facility, to your parents, because I do think it is a critical piece. Again, they don't count towards ratio. We all know that, but with potentially more kids with individualized learning plans, because some of these providers are going to have kids from multiple schools or school districts with different kind of plans that are in place. I think the more assistance that we can provide, the more individualized learning opportunities will only be better. So I wanted to mention that. We will make sure with Alyssa's help that we get that word out. Dwight, sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's good. In regards to certification, I think there may be another conversation. And again, that's why, Kate Levier is here to help us with that. And I'm sure she's writing those things down. And we talked about doing another meeting that talks just specifically with certification and some other resources that she has access to. And then we can get into some of those specific questions, because that is their decision of how much they're allowed to in flexibility that they're willing to show in regards to that. And this isn't the only one program that's asking that question. So we know that's our, from our perspective, we have a task force of directors that have been working on, some guidance around our schools. And we know that's our next big question to ask that group, is how to address certifications in some of these areas. So, and this one is bubbling right up to the top. So.
Yeah. I did want to come back, if I may, to the question that was asked, and Alyssa answered it, about when you have a mix of 4 and 5-year-olds, how does that work with the masking requirement? Keep in mind that we still, while it's not a requirement, we still, in our guidance, encourage and recommend that 2 to 4-year-olds wear masks and face coverings. My background, for those of you who don't know, is at two different points in my career, I led agencies that included childcare settings, 3 different childcare centers, all over 100 kids, all infants to 5-year-olds, and all nationally accredited. One of the things that if I had this question, I was still in that role, one of the things that I would advise our teachers and educators to do is, it's a great opportunity, just like you would with any other skill or potentially academic learning opportunity, is to work with the 5-year-olds. I mean, in those settings, we always talk, I know we always talk to our 5-year-olds about being the leaders and how they are the role models and how they can help teach the younger children in those settings of what to, what are the right things to do. And using it as a learning opportunity. Those 5-year-olds are going to go to kindergarten, and we don't know how long we're going to be fighting this environment with COVID. They're going to be required to wear face coverings. It's a good opportunity, just like we do everything else to get kids school ready, to take this opportunity to help to teach, model, and work with students so that they can meet those requirements. We fully recognize, and I want to be clear about this, we fully recognize it is going to be a challenge. It is going to be a challenge for the 5-year-olds. Heck, it's going to be a challenge for, first graders, second graders. It's probably going to be a challenge for high schoolers to keep those face coverings on. It might even be a challenge for some adult staff. We recognize the challenges there. Our commitment is to work with providers and centers to help them move towards implementation with fidelity to the greatest extent possible, but recognizing that it's going to be an ongoing challenge, just like it is an ongoing challenge for some of the other skills or academic learning that we have for some of our kids and students. So I at least wanted to come back to that question. So I'm trying to keep track of some of the things in the group chat. So go ahead, Dwight, or if someone else wants to put out a question.
No,
I have a
thanks, Todd. That's great.
Maybe
Pam,
Dwight, is that,
Pam, go ahead.
yeah, and put myself out on the line a little bit. So for me anyways, and I think for a lot of us, our main thrust is the high school students. Like our job is to teach high school students how to work with little ones. So that's the main job. And so that is our focus. And so then we also have, obviously, a lot of us have labs or nursery schools where we care for little ones as well. And our big girls, our students, have, assisted in those programs. For me, what I'm hearing, so I have 3-year-olds, they're 2.5 to 3 in a play school sort of setting, not nursery school, not pre-K. And so what I'm hearing from my parents, the littles' parents, is that I am not an essential program. This is not a daycare center. They don't need me. They're coming to me to help my high school students learn. And so the question for them, and it's a really good one, is why would I put my 2- and 3-year-old in jeopardy to help your students? And they've always helped our students, but now it's a huge question, because, as someone already said, we serve 3, 4, 5, 6 sending schools. We're bringing in students, a whole set of them in the morning, another whole set of them in the afternoon, so they're going to be exposed in our environments to a lot of different students from a lot of different schools. And is that prudent? And is that really best practice? Is it okay for us ethically even to put all these little ones at risk when they don't really need us? We need them. And are we using them in a way that isn't really fair? Like we're putting their lives on the line, seriously, to emulate our programs. But is that okay? And is it okay to make parents feel like they have to do that? Or providers, like daycare providers, feel like they have to take our girls on? And I'm struggling with that. I just feel like,
Sure.
Yes, I want to help my big girls and I want to give them everything they need to get certified, but I do not want to put a 2-year-old's life on the line for that.
Absolutely. And I think it's a valid question. And I'm going to address the first question that I picked up on in your discussion and what you were sharing. To begin with, no parent should ever feel like they have to do something along the lines that you're talking about. That is a parental choice. And I think we all honor and recognize that parental choice. And I think we recognize that for some parents, they are not going to be comfortable in doing that. And that is okay. That is perfectly, from my vantage point, at least from an OCFS perspective, that is certainly okay. We honor the parent choice and we honor the parent decision-making in that situation. For those parents who don't know whether or not they should be, maybe they want to continue to have their child in that setting for a variety of reasons for the child's benefit, as well as the benefit of the program and your students. There are some things I think they need to be aware of in making that decision. First and foremost, I think they need to understand what are the safety and health precautions that are going to be in place to protect their children. Those safety and health precautions that we have put out as recommendations, or in some cases as requirements, are based on the latest science and evidence that's available. So for example, we know out of studies out of South Korea and other locations that we know the initial studies that are coming out is that there appears to be a breaking point around the age of 10, that children under the age of 10 appear to be significantly less susceptible to COVID. Not that they're immune from COVID, and I want to be very clear about that, but the research says they appear to be much less susceptible, whereas over the age of 10, it appears that those children in those age groups generally seem to have the same exposure opportunities and same ability to contract COVID as an adult does. So that's, for example, one of the studies that I think we can point to. The other thing that I would point to is child care centers in Maine, and that, to their credit, they have followed, as much as they may not have liked them, they have followed our recommendations and mandates to the greatest extent possible. Since mid-March, in all of our centers across the state, we have had 5 situations of a staff member or a child testing positive for COVID. None of them in any of those settings rose to the situation or classification of an outbreak, meaning 3 staff and or children being tested positive for COVID. That seems to align with the data and studies and research that's coming out of South Korea and some other locations around the susceptibility of children for COVID. Is it a guarantee? Absolutely not. Is it an additional information point that that parents may want to consider? It absolutely, in my opinion, should be. So I think we honor, wrapping, kind of capsulating it, we honor what the parents are choosing. We recognize that they may choose not to do that, and that's okay. And for those parents who say, tell me more, what does this mean? What risk am I potentially taking? I think we share that information in a non-biased, non-threatening, guilt-inducing way, and we let the parent make that choice. And it does reasonably mean that you'll have fewer kids that are going to be coming into care. I will share with you, for whatever it's worth, and my daughter's now grown and working for the State Department in DC, but if I had my daughter and she was an infant at this point, and that question came up to us, we would weigh the benefits of them being in a social environment, in a high quality environment, in a caring environment, with the risk, and we would make the decision. I personally, if I knew the center was meeting all of those safety and health precautions, I would very likely feel comfortable with my child being in that environment. But every parent should have the ability and the wherewithal to be able to make that decision based on whatever information that they feel is important to take into account. So I'm noticing some of you are, not having a full opening of your preschool until January, and making a decision there. That's certainly an option as well. We know some schools across the country have said they're going to go to full remote learning until the spring, or until they feel like there is a vaccine or treatment in place that would enable them to do that. And that's certainly an option. That's certainly an option as well. And so we're going to see very much a patchwork, in my opinion, of solutions and directions that are taking across the state. It's similar to the patchwork that I think you'll see, using that term, of how different school districts are going to be providing education beginning this fall and into the spring. And we're seeing it in other environments, higher ed, et cetera. So Diane, please go ahead.
Yeah, Diane.
So thank you. Thank you for being here today. I'll go quick because my dog's in the background. You're saying we can still have preschools to the best of what we think was appropriate with the CTC guidelines and licensing, and that's still fully okay, whatever way we deem appropriate. Is that what I'm hearing, that that's okay still to do? What I'm saying is from a licensed child care capacity, and so I should confirm. I'm assuming, or I shouldn't assume, but I'm assuming at least some of your programs, if not all of them, are may be licensed or may not be. But nonetheless, whether they're licensed or not, what we are saying from an OCFS perspective, and again, this is going to could be overridden from a DOE perspective. So Nicole, you can jump in here. Nicole or Dwight, you guys are welcome to jump in here. But from an OCFS perspective, if a setting, whether licensed or not, is going to open, and they make that decision to open, they should follow all of the safety and health recommendations and requirements
that we have put out in guidance and that US and Maine CDC have implemented. Recognizing that it's up to the individual program to open. So I think some of your programs, I could be wrong. I thought some of your programs were licensed. Most of them may not be, but regardless, for those, even in those unlicensed situations where we don't have any direct impact or control, we would strongly recommend, and I would only advise a parent if they were considering to go into that situation, that if that program is following the safety and health precautions issued by our office, issued by the Department of Education, and issued by the US and Maine CDC. Nicole, Dwight, you guys want to weigh in on that?
Go ahead, Nicole.
Thanks, Dwight. No, I would agree with that. I mean, the Maine DOE framework has the 6 requirements, and those are certainly true in our public pre-K programs. We've been working on a guidance document for pre-K to sort of translate better what those 6 requirements look like in a pre-K setting. The 2 to 4 year old recommendation for face coverings, for example, even though that's technically a recommendation and not a requirement, I agree with what Todd and Alyssa said as far as still encouraging students to wear masks. So that's just one example, especially we're asking districts to take a stance on that one way or the other. Just because it's recommended by us, don't make it necessarily recommended in the classroom, because you're bound to end up with student A whose family is fine with no mask, but student B whose family is saying, no, my child needs to wear a mask. And then the teacher being stuck in the middle as far as explaining constantly why B needs a mask and A doesn't, etc. So we are encouraging districts to take a stance, either yes, face coverings or no face coverings, but the social distancing, staff face coverings, the disinfecting and sanitizing and all of that. So now once all of those requirements are sort of in place and we say, okay, that is what it is, now it's up to us or up to the teachers to figure out how to implement that in their classrooms. So many programs are limiting students and doing sort of a 2-day on, 3-day off model. Even though they're a green county, they're still going with their yellow plans, which is one way of doing it. Some districts are doing AM and PM, which is another interesting way of doing things, because there's leaves little time in between to disinfect. But with all of that said, we're still encouraging, we're still telling teachers that this is what we're good at, right? This is why you do what you do. Yes, this is crummy and this is putting a huge thorn in our programs and what we love about pre-K, but you're good at making safe, fun, exciting environments for kids. Instead of saying, ugh, I have to wear a mask, hey, check out my mask, look, it has dinosaurs, whatever it is, and making it something that's interactive and exciting for the students, right? And talking about why we need to social distance and that, just being open and honest with them about that. And then we're also encouraging classrooms to take it outside, right? This is no better time to get outdoors, not just for free play and running around and getting wiggles out, but for doing whole group circles, for doing read alouds, for exploring nature, for getting out in the woods and playing safely and doing, encouraging that as well. Yeah. And then as far as there was a comment in the chat around family style dining. We're actually encouraging our programs to do family style dining. No, we're not going to have 4 or 5 kids at a table, but you could have 2 children, and they're not going to probably be able to self-serve, because now we're going to have germs on utensils. But if teachers can facilitate serving on plates and serving students and practicing that routine, that's still a way to be in a space, be interactive, have conversations with the students without having to eliminate that altogether. We can still share space. We can still have a block center. We can still have a dramatic play center. We can still have an art and an easel center. We're just going to have to be mindful about how many children are in there and what's being used and when. Can we have plush toys and curtains and all of these, soft blankets and alone spaces? Those are going to look different because we probably can't have those. But we can still encourage a mask-free zone, or we can still encourage hand washing and making that fun with, stamps or markers and making them wash it off, right? It's just going to be a different dynamic of the teacher to sort of sell it as this is our classroom and this is this amazing, even though it's kind of crummy.
Yeah, and I'll jump onto that just a little bit, Nicole, because one of the questions, and I'll take it a step further, one of the questions that have come up from some of our providers has been, I've always, my kids love the water table or the water tray or the water table in their classrooms. And, we don't want masks or face coverings getting wet because that does inhibit the airflow. And what we've had to say is, okay, maybe, as much as kids love the water table, maybe this is a time that you're going to have to just unfortunately switch to a sand table instead, and remove that water aspect from inside the classroom. We are going to have to make some adjustments. Nicole is exactly right. We have said if an item cannot be easily disinfected, we should discourage and want to discourage the use of those items. So yes, is that an unfortunate aspect because of some of the soft plush toys and things of that nature? Absolutely. Regrettably, and I'm going to just be a little blunt here, COVID doesn't care. And so we need to do everything that we can from a safety and health precaution. It doesn't mean that we can no longer have we're not going to have any toys in the classrooms. We're just going to have different kinds of toys or different kinds of experiences than what we may really like to have and prefer. And hopefully it's a relatively short time period. Hopefully we're going to look back 6 months, 8 months, something like that from now, and we're going to be able to say, okay, we can now return to all of those things. But in the meantime, while those things are preferred, we're going to have to actually give up some of those things we all prefer to do, socially or otherwise, in respect of what we're doing and the environment that we're in right now. You asked the question about hugging between teachers and kids. Yep, that's one of the things that unfortunately is going to have to change a bit. One of the things that, and I was on a call with a handful of providers just yesterday, and all of them, there were 5 of them on the call, and they've all been operating since mid-March, and they all said the same thing. Children right now are struggling to keep their mask on and without fidgeting and touching their mask. Absolutely understand. That we know is going to be a challenge. At the same time, they all said they all were amazingly surprised at how well the kids were doing from a not touching and being separated, from a physical standpoint. And in large part, they believe their working theory was kids are out in the communities, they're in stores, Kohl's, retail, etc., and they see all the markers on the floor. You know what? Kids have been used to that a whole lot longer than we have been used to that as adults because of some of those visual cues that we have implemented in schools and in other settings. They have adapted apparently quite well to that. Some of our teachers talked about buying a bunch of the $1 pool tubes or whatever you want to call those, because most of them are about 5 to 6 feet in length, so they're roughly the right size. And so they've gone outside, and from the very get-go, when they did outside lessons, they laid all of those tubes out on the ground, and kids got very used to that visual reinforcement of what 6 feet roughly looks like. Unfortunately, in our society right now, in our retail and other settings, they're getting some of that reinforcement that many of us are looking for. So I guess the one thing I want to take away from all of that, what Nicole was saying, teaching doesn't change. How we're going about teaching and the manipulatives that we use in teaching are definitely going to change, at least for the next several months.
And Todd, I would put warm water and soap in the Discovery Center, and then when the toys are done, they just pop them in there, and kids can wash them, right?
Perfect.
Yeah, it's a great teaching thing. I mean, I know some of our centers, when it comes to disinfecting the toys, they're not turning that responsibility over to the kids. But guess what? The kids are actually helping with that. Now, the teachers are still doing it all themselves to make sure it's done properly. But it's a great opportunity to teach the kids. And guess what? We all know that kids, what they learn oftentimes in a setting, whether it's school, childcare, or other settings, many times they're going home and fortunately they're teaching their parents or other siblings how to do it. That's all a good thing. And that goes all the way down to hand washing and the songs that you sing and things of that nature. It is a good opportunity. And I think there's an incredibly positive and valuable role for childcare and other settings and for your students who are learning how to teach in this environment to be able to benefit from some of those pieces. So is it a tiny little silver lining on this cloud that we're going through? Possibly so, But you know what? As educators, we always look for those silver linings to be able to take advantage of.
Great. Any other, Pam, go ahead.
A second. I think that everybody's done a really good job of making sure that we keep children healthy and safe physically. And that is what COVID is. You know, like you said, COVID does not care. For me, I know that our program, and a lot of programs, is about socialization. Little ones come to socialize, and it's all been about, it's a relationship focused program. It's relational. We do little ones, 2-year-olds. Parents want their children to come because they want them to learn how to share, how to get along with others, to prepare them for pre-K. And so like I said, I appreciate how well people have done supporting us and letting us know how to keep our children healthy and safe. I can't wait for people to help us figure out how to keep our children loved and nurtured, because that is really what we're about. And that's the piece that I think, you know, how, you know, parents hand us their children that are crying, you know, and this is their first time that they're leaving their moms. And the intent was that, you know, they leave mom's arms and they come into my arms, and I hold them and I support that. And now parents are encouraged to drop their children on doorsteps, you know, and then we go take them, but not even really touch them, and leave them on the rug to sort of problem solve that at 2 or 3. I want support that way. And I'm just asking, is that coming? You know, like, I know you've done 10-page documents on how to keep our children healthy and safe, but I want a document, or I want help, ideas on how to love and nurture them, and make sure that socially and emotionally that we are not damaging these children for life. Because, I mean, Erickson is all about trust. And you know, when you look at Maslow's pyramid, we're all kind of dealing in that first level right now, you know, but our children need us in that love level, and that's not where we are, and that's where we need to be. And so how do we teach our high school students, you know, to do this well, you know, to be providers, like you said, in this COVID situation, but still give them, because again, the high school students are a priority, and how to teach them best practice. That's what I'm trying to do. And this isn't really best practice. I think everybody can agree to that, although it's the safest practice. So are you thinking that maybe we can have a document that helps providers, early childhood teachers, do what we've always done in a way that is also socially and emotionally sound?
Yeah, and to answer that question, and I would, and I will bring this up again and remind, MRTQ is doing some work specifically around that, and I want to be clear, we have not instituted a situation, at least in our guidance. Now, DOE, I defer to them on any of those situations in the environments that you may be in. And our guidance, we've never said you can't actually, you're prohibited from touching or physically, you know, hugging or consoling a child. We have also said, though, to do that with all the safety and health protections, masks, et cetera, which we know can get in the way of that interaction. Some providers, we are allowing it within OCFS. It may not be allowed within DOE, but we're allowing within OCF for them to use the face shield so that they can still see the full visual face. Some have preferred to go in that direction. Some have preferred not to. We're still allowing that physical contact. We're also saying limit it, so you don't want to. We've had some situations where we all know where a child, particularly a younger child, was on someone's hip being carried around all day long. We're also let's try to avoid some of that as well. But there is a balance there. There is a balance, and we're trusting our educators and providers to maintain that balance, while trying to keep in mind that if you're going to be in close physical contact with a child, let's make sure you're being very adherent to those safety and health precautions. You must be wearing that face shield, face covering, face mask. You need to make sure that you're sanitizing or washing your hands afterwards before you go and do the same thing with another child. You need to try to limit it to the extent that's possible. In your example of drop off and pickup, let's make sure that you ideally, it's someone that is going to be in the classroom with that child that is taking the child from the parent at the front door, and to ensure that. That's not always possible. We understand that. But to the extent possible, we've encouraged that to happen, and some centers have been able to do that. Or at least it's a consistent person that is working with the child. Is it ideal to your point? Absolutely not. Is it absolute best practice from what we know? Absolutely not. Is it what we have to do right now because safety comes first and foremost? Yes, it is. I know we're right at 10 o'clock. I do want to answer Diane's question. How many cases in our areas have reported COVID in their centers? As I said, we've had 5 centers since mid-March report 1 case or 2 cases, period. We've never had a center that reported more than 2 cases, so you don't see it reported as an outbreak. That's a good thing. So 5 total out of the hundreds. We have 1,600 licensed centers in the state. Do I think that number could increase as we head into the fall? Possibly. But our hope is that by getting out in front with some pretty stringent and clear safety and health precautions, that we'll be able to keep that number very, very low. Now, I'm not going to share how many are in each individual county and where those 5 are in the counties because of some confidentiality pieces. But they're not all in the southern part of the state. They are geographically spread. So it's a very small number. We want to keep that number very small, and that's why we're trying to get out ahead by putting some of these safety and health precautions in place. The answer is, do centers need to close as a result of 1 case? Usually not. However, it is on an individual basis. So we have had situations where a center only had 1 positive case, but once Maine CDC did their investigation, there were a number of individuals that were requested to quarantine because of their close contacts, and the center decided because of a staffing challenge that they would close. So of the five situations I talked about, in 1 situation they did close, in the other 4 they did not close. If they closed for only a 24 to 48 period of time to do some intensive deep cleaning before they reopened. So it wasn't an extended closure. But I will say in 1 of the 5 cases they did close for a period of, I believe, a week and a half.
Todd, I want to thank you. This has been great. Marcy, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to add something?
I was actually just in the chat room. I'm heading to another meeting. I wanted to touch on what Pam was talking about with the children who have a hard time at drop off and pick up and the social emotional. I think it's important to remember that children are really adaptable, especially at the ages that we are working with. And if adults are positive and they're coming up with new routines and visuals, it really is, for the majority of children, it really is a 3 to 5 minute time when they're truly upset and they're missing their parents, and we all understand that. Where we can't, necessarily pick them up and, wipe their faces and do everything that we would normally do and how we'd normally do it. If adults are being positive and having new routines and those sort of things, the kids are also going to pick up on the positivity. If the adults in the classroom are like, oh, here we go again, this is not going to work, this isn't going to be good, the children are also going to pick up on that. So it's really important to remember, just think outside the box and just remain really positive, because that's what the children are going to pick up on.
Very true. Very
Great.
true. Thank you for
Great.
sharing that.
Thank you, Marcy. Thank you all. Real quick survey, very scientific. If you would like to do another meeting and talk about certifications, give me this, and Kate and I will jump on that and make that happen. Okay. So Kate, you and I can try to set something up, and we can have that conversation as well. But Todd, this has been super helpful. Appreciate it. I would encourage you all to reach out to both Nicole and Marcy as a resource, both in working even with your own students. for online resources and how to make those connections. I think like I said, we're really working to try to bridge this gap, if you will, that's kind of been in place here at the department between their team and CTE. I think they can really be a great resource for us. And Todd, thank you so much for making this connection. It's been very helpful, and I think certainly folks can see that you're out there advocating for CTE and certainly doing all that you can, and we appreciate all of that. So
yeah. Thank you guys very much. Reach out if there's anything else that we can do, or if we want to jump back on it at some point to talk about latest developments.
good.
So
Real quick,
thank you.
Nicole and I both put our email in the chat room, so our email addresses are in there as well.
Perfect.
Thank you guys.
Thank you all. Brenda, you and I will work together on setting up another meeting, but we'll keep these conversations going and appreciate your support with us. So
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Dwight.
thanks.